The intercom blared, shrill as an alarm siren. "Captain Hayes, we need you in first class immediately." The entire cabin of 147 passengers fell silent. Curious eyes drifted away from the phone screens and turned forward. Somewhere, a baby stopped crying, replaced by anxious murmurs. In seat 2A of first class, David Carter, a 49-year-old black man, sat motionless. He did not move when Melissa Turner, a 31-year-old flight attendant, demanded he show his ticket again. He did not move when she, her voice cold but tinged with nervousness, accused him of fraud. And he did not move even as passengers began raising their phones, eager to turn him into the next global spectacle. David simply gazed out the window. On his wrist, the polished Patek Philippe watch glinted faintly under the cabin lights, like a secret signal only he could read. "Sir, you are delaying this entire flight. If you do not leave this seat, we will call the captain," Melissa said, her voice stretched taut like a string. She believed a few familiar threats would be enough to force a so-called misplaced passenger to bow. But David smiled. That smile sent a chill down Melissa's spine. Not because it was mocking, not because it was aggressive, but because it was the smile of a man who knew exactly what was about to happen. Inside the pocket of his tailored suit, his phone buzzed. A message lit up. "Everything is ready, sir. Just give the signal. Signed, Legal Team." Melissa did not see those words. The passengers did not. All they saw was a black man in an expensive suit, sitting in silence, refusing to comply. To them, he was a problem. To David, this was a test. At the back of the cabin, Olivia Price, a 25-year-old woman, raised her phone to live stream. Her viewers jumped from a few hundred to a few thousand. Comments flooded the screen. "What's happening? Southwest is about to get in trouble. This is blatant discrimination." The air grew thick, the pressure crushing every word Melissa spoke. She turned to the other passengers, hoping for agreement. The businessman in seat 1C glanced at his watch and sighed in irritation. A couple in 2C whispered, avoiding David's eyes. A teenager in 4A raised his phone higher, his gaze glowing with the thrill of witnessing a viral explosion. Then Captain Richard Hayes appeared. 60. 6 heavy steps, pounding like war drums, carried him from the cockpit to first class. His uniform, 4 golden stripes gleaming on his shoulders, made Melissa feel reassured. In her mind, this would be resolved quickly. "What's going on, Melissa?" His voice was deep, stern. 20. 3 years of flying had taught him passenger issues had to be resolved fast. "He," Melissa pointed directly, "is in the wrong seat. No valid ticket. Acting aggressive." Hayes turned his eyes to David, a middle-aged man, sitting upright, hands clasped on his lap, gaze steady and calm. No sign of threat, no sign of agitation. But Melissa had never lied before. Hayes trusted his crew. He bent down, extending a hand. "Sir, may I see your ticket?" David did not speak. He handed over the boarding pass, clearly printed. Southwest Airlines, Flight 2847, Seat 2A. Hayes frowned. The ticket was completely valid. Name, code, time, everything matched. "It looks fine," he said cautiously. But Melissa muttered, loud enough for the cabin to hear, "It's fake. Captain, look at him. Do you really think someone like that belongs in first class?" Her words sliced the air like a blade. A chilling silence fell. Then came the sound of Olivia's keyboard clicks, blending with the pounding of hearts as the live stream crossed 8,000 viewers. David lifted his head. For the first time since Hayes arrived, he spoke. His voice was low, steady, each word crystal clear. "Someone like me?" Melissa did not back down. "Yes, I see hundreds of passengers a day. I know who belongs and who doesn't. That ticket could have been bought off some black market site." A tidal wave stirred beneath the surface. Online viewers erupted in the chat. "Did she just say that? This is open racism. Zoom in. Show her face." Hayes felt his stomach twist. He had never seen Melissa this shaken, but her words were dangerous. Far too dangerous. David glanced at his watch. 12 minutes had passed. 12 minutes of silence, of patience, of watching. Enough. He adjusted his collar and turned to the captain. "Captain Hayes, before you decide, I'd like to ask, do you know what Federal Aviation Law, Section 91.1 actually states?" The question sliced through the dense air like a knife. Melissa froze. Hayes stiffened. Few people knew that law, except lawyers, politicians, or someone with true authority in the industry. And in that moment, as the live stream passed 15,000 viewers, everyone in the cabin felt it. The man in seat 2A was not ordinary. The intercom crackled again, a female voice echoing from the cockpit. "Ground security, prepare to assist with a disruptive passenger in first class." The cabin erupted. Some passengers shot up from their seats. Others pulled out their phones to record. Olivia Price's live stream had already passed 30,000 viewers. The comments poured in like a flood. "This is about to blow up. Leave the man alone. This is clearly discrimination. You're watching a multi-million-dollar lawsuit happen right now." Captain Hayes glanced at Melissa. She was breathing hard, her face flushed, her hands clenched as if desperate to prove she was right. Hayes swallowed. 23 years of experience had taught him to stay calm, yet now his palms were damp with sweat. 4 minutes later, the plane shuddered as the door opened. 2 security officers entered with deliberate steps that struck like hammers. Janet Lopez, a 42-year-old officer, and Michael O'Connor, 38, broad, shouldered, eyes cold. "What's the situation?" Janet asked, her voice sharp and cutting. Melissa pointed straight at David. "This man took a first-class seat, refused to provide valid documentation, and has been threatening staff." The entire cabin held its breath. Olivia zoomed her phone on David's face, broadcasting to tens of thousands that he remained calm, hands folded on his lap, eyes sharp as steel. Janet stepped closer. "Sir, we request that you leave this seat voluntarily. If not, we will be forced to restrain you." David looked up, his voice low yet carrying through the cabin. "I am sitting in the seat I purchased. I hold a valid ticket. I am not disruptive. I will not leave." Michael stepped forward, hand already resting on his plastic restraints. The cabin trembled. Passengers whispered in panic, Don't do it." But David calmly adjusted his watch, glancing at the time as if measuring each second. His words came out steady, deliberate. Before you lay a hand on me, remember this. Wrongfully detaining or removing a passenger with a valid ticket can constitute unlawful detention. Are you prepared to bear personal legal liability? Janet froze. The language he used, it was not the language of an ordinary traveler. These were the words of a lawyer, a politician, or a power player. Olivia nearly shouted into her live stream. Oh my God, he knows the law. This is not just any passenger. The viewer count surged past 42,000. Captain Hayes felt his heart pounding. He remembered the message from the operations center just minutes earlier. Social media is exploding. Handle with extreme caution. Suddenly, Hayes's phone buzzed in his pocket. On the screen, urgent call, Operations HQ. David leaned back, his voice deep, commanding. You should take that call, Captain. It will change your career. Hayes hesitated, then lifted the phone. On the other end, a male voice rushed with urgency. We're monitoring social media. Over 40,000 people are watching live. Reporters are already contacting us. Do not, under any circumstances, touch the passenger in seat 2A until further instruction from top leadership. Hayes went pale. He turned to Janet and Michael, still tense before David. But David simply smiled, not arrogant, not mocking. The smile of a man who held the game in his hands. He spoke, soft yet firm. I think you should know, at least 12 devices in this cabin are recording. Every discriminatory word Melissa uttered is captured, and in just 30 seconds, a call will come from headquarters. A call that will end the careers of a few people here. Melissa froze, her face drained white. You're threatening us? David shook his head. No, I'm only stating facts, and facts always win. A sharp ding cut the silence. Hayes's phone buzzed again. This time the name on the screen nearly made him drop it. Thomas Reynolds, Senior Vice President. The cabin fell into dead silence. Passengers held their breath. The live stream climbed past 50,000 viewers. Hayes lifted the phone to his ear, his voice trembling. Yes, sir. I'm handling it. In seat 2A, David Carter crossed his arms, his gaze fixed on Melissa. In that moment, the balance of power flipped. The man who had been doubted, disrespected, and accused now stood at the center, while others trembled. And in the heart of every passenger, the same question pulsed. Who exactly is he? The cabin seemed to lose all sound, leaving only the pounding of hearts. The phone in Captain Hayes's hand trembled as the voice of Thomas Reynolds came through loud and clear. Captain Hayes, no one is to touch the passenger in seat 2A. We are monitoring this live. All decisions will be made at the executive level. Do you understand? Hayes swallowed hard, his heart sinking into his stomach. In 23 years, he had never once received a call from a senior vice president. He looked around the cabin, at the tense eyes of passengers, at the phones raised high, and at the man still sitting motionless in seat 2A. David Carter, the calm center of a storm. Janet Lopez raised an eyebrow, suspicion flickering in her eyes. Michael O'Connor clenched the plastic restraints in his hands, but instinct pulled him a step back. Something about this felt wrong. David looked directly at the captain, his voice low and unshakable. I told you, this is not an ordinary incident. This is a test, and unfortunately, You have all failed. Melissa Turner stood frozen. Sweat beaded on her forehead as her eyes darted for support. But everyone around her saw only the truth. The truth that every word she had said, from someone like him to a fake ticket, had been captured by dozens of lenses and broadcast to the world. Olivia Price's live stream surged past 60,000 viewers. Comments exploded across the feed. My God, he's not just anyone. They're all going to lose their jobs. Who knows aviation law like that, except someone inside the industry? David exhaled, as if the time had come to reveal his first card. He opened the leather case at his side. Every eye followed his hand, the tension so thick some passengers held their breath. Michael tensed, his hand instinctively brushing the taser on his belt. But instead of a weapon, David pulled out a sleek leather card holder, slid out a single business card, and handed it directly to Janet Lopez. Perhaps you should look at this before taking another step. Janet hesitated. She accepted the card, her eyes scanning the embossed print. Instantly her face drained of color. Her hand shook as she passed it to Michael. A single glance left him just as speechless. What does it say? Hayes asked, his throat dry. Janet drew a deep breath, but could not hide her shock. David Carter, chairman of the board, Southwest Airlines. The cabin erupted like thunder. Some passengers screamed, others zoomed their cameras. The live stream chat exploded. Chairman of the board. That's the end for the racists. This clip will go down in history. Melissa staggered, her face drained of blood. She stammered, refusing to believe. No, impossible. The chairman would never fly commercial. He must be lying. David turned his gaze to her, cold as ice. The thing about truth, Melissa, is that it does not need belief to exist. At that moment, Hayes's phone rang again. This time it was a female voice, commanding and resolute. This is Patricia Holloway, Senior Vice President of Operations. All action against Mr. Carter ends immediately. Mr. Carter is not just a passenger. He is the direct superior of every single one of us. Hayes felt his knees nearly give out. Melissa gasped, nearly collapsing. Janet and Michael instantly dropped their restraints, standing rigid, their faces transformed into reluctant respect. David leaned back, slowly adjusting his cuff. Finally, someone said it. But too late. Olivia cried out on her live stream. He really is the chairman. My God, this is the biggest reveal I've ever seen on a plane. The very air in the cabin seemed to change. No longer was he the nameless passenger being humiliated. David Carter was now the living symbol of truth laid bare. And as the viewer count climbed past 70,000, a mix of dread and awe swept through the cabin. From this moment on, there was no turning back. The cabin was thick with tension, like a courtroom convened in the sky. Every eye, every phone, was fixed on the man in seat 2A. No longer a disruptive passenger, no longer someone who didn't belong in first class. Before them now was David Carter, chairman of the board of Southwest Airlines. Captain Richard Hayes felt sweat soaking through his uniform. He had weathered hundreds of turbulent flights, but never a storm like this. 23 years of career could collapse because of 15 reckless minutes. Melissa Turner had sunk into an empty seat, her face ghostly pale. David's words echoed in her mind. The truth does not need belief to exist. She knew every insult, every contemptuous glance had been recorded, watched by 70,000 people live. David's eyes swept the cabin. He did not need to shout. His voice was low, steady, but it rang like a bell of reckoning. All of you have just witnessed a historic moment. A flight attendant claimed I did not belong here simply because I did not look like what she thought first class should be. A captain, instead of asking the truth, prepared to call security to drag me off. And now, the whole world is watching. Olivia Price clutched her phone, almost shaking with adrenaline. Her live stream had surpassed 85,000 viewers. Comments surged like waves. He's absolutely right. This isn't just discrimination. This is a global lesson. Southwest Airlines will never be the same after today. Hayes tried to steady himself, stepping forward. Chairman Carter, we didn't know. This was just a misunderstanding. David cut him off, his words sharp as a blade. Not a misunderstanding. An assumption. And that assumption was rooted in prejudice. Melissa broke into sobs, her choked cries echoing through the cabin. But David did not look away. His voice grew stronger. You assumed a black passenger couldn't afford first class. You assumed my ticket was fake. You assumed my silent smile was a threat. Every one of those assumptions today has become evidence. The intercom chimed. Operations Center. Currently 14 news outlets are broadcasting this incident live. Resolve the situation immediately. Hayes felt his whole body sink. His career, his reputation, his future, all hanging by a thread. He opened his mouth to explain, but David raised his hand, silencing him. David pulled a tablet from his case, held it up toward Olivia's camera. The screen lit with the Southwest Airlines logo and a series of documents, internal reports showing 47 complaints of discrimination in just the past quarter. You think this is a small incident? No, this is part of a system, and today this flight will be the tipping point. Passengers murmured, eyes wide with shock. A middle-aged man in seat 1C muttered, My God, this isn't about a seat anymore. This is instead of the entire airline. David leaned back, pausing, letting his words sink into every soul in the cabin. Then he closed the tablet slowly and turned to Hayes and Melissa. You have two choices. 1. Stand up, admit your mistakes, and commit to change. 2. Stay silent, and I will add this to the termination file the moment we land. The cabin fell into silence, broken only by Melissa's sobs. Hayes closed his eyes, feeling his entire career collapse before him. He thought of his biracial son, and suddenly the question struck him. If one day that boy was thrown out of first class simply because of his skin, how would I feel? The live stream soared past 90,000 viewers. Olivia whispered, Oh my God. He just turned a flight into a tribunal of justice. David glanced at his Patek Philippe watch. The second hand ticked forward, its gleam a reminder that the time for silence was over. He lifted his gaze, piercing and unyielding. Decide now. The world is watching. First class was so silent, the ticking of David Carter's watch could be heard. Every passing second pushed Captain Richard Hayes and flight attendant Melissa Turner closer to the edge. The cabin felt like a stage, and the tens of thousands watching Olivia Price's live stream were the audience waiting for the verdict. Hayes swallowed hard. He wanted to speak, to explain that he was only following procedure, but the words stuck in his throat. David's gaze made him feel small, like a cadet under a drill sergeant's scrutiny. Melissa slumped in her seat, mascara streaking down her cheeks like ink. She choked out, I didn't mean to. I was only doing my job." David never took his eyes off her. His voice dropped lower, slow and deliberate, each word striking like a hammer. "No, Melissa. You weren't doing your job. You were doing what prejudice made you believe was right. And today, that becomes a lesson for the entire industry." A sharp ding from the intercom cut the air. Hayes grabbed the handset, but when he heard the voice that followed, his face drained. "This is Robert Mitchell, CEO of Southwest Airlines. We are watching live." The entire cabin froze. Olivia nearly screamed into her live stream. "My God, the CEO is in! This is the climax!" David tilted his head slightly, a faint smile, as if he had predicted this exact moment. Robert Mitchell's voice thundered through the speakers. "Captain Hayes, Melissa Turner, you are both suspended immediately. When this plane lands, HR and legal will meet with you directly." Melissa broke down in tears, burying her face in her hands. Hayes stood rooted, the world collapsing beneath him. He thought of his family, his mortgage, his years of service, all reduced now to one cold phrase: suspended. David folded his arms, his voice clear and resonant, reaching every corner of the cabin and more than 100,000 live viewers. "I remained silent for 12 minutes. In that time, you prepared to humiliate me, to throw me off this plane, to call security and drag me out. But 12 minutes was enough for the world to see exactly what is wrong with Southwest Airlines." He pulled out a tablet and opened a video call. The screen lit up with the executive boardroom, a long table of leaders in sharp suits. At the center, Patricia Holloway, Senior Vice President of Operations, her eyes sharp as blades. "David, we are watching live. What are your demands?" Her voice was precise and unwavering. David turned the tablet so the cabin and Olivia's camera could see. Gasps filled the air, and Olivia's voice trembled with emotion. "Oh my God, the entire executive board is watching this moment live." David spoke slowly, each word heavy as stone. "My demand is simple. From today forward, any act of discrimination results in immediate termination. No excuses. No protective procedures." Patricia nodded firmly. "I will present this to the board immediately after this flight. You will have it in writing." Whispers rippled through the cabin, a mix of shock and awe. A passenger in seat 3D muttered, "This is unprecedented. A flight turning into a board meeting." Melissa rose on trembling legs, tears streaming down her face. She turned to David, pleading, "Please, I have a small child. Please, give me another chance." David looked into her desperate eyes. For a fleeting moment, he saw his younger self, a man dismissed because of the color of his skin, but his jaw tightened, his voice cutting cold. "The chance was not mine to take. You lost it yourself with your prejudice." The cabin fell silent. The sound of phones clicking filled the air, photos, clips, comments, spreading across social media at the speed of light. David glanced at his Patek Philippe. The second hand ticked forward. He lifted his gaze and declared slowly, "Flight 2847, from this day, it will not be remembered for its delay, but for changing an entire industry." Applause erupted from the back rows, spreading until it filled the cabin. Not applause for the downfall of a crew, but applause for something greater. They had just witnessed justice revealed in the skies. Applause rose from the back of the cabin, echoing and spreading until it filled the air. In that strange moment, amid the suffocating tension, everyone instinctively stood behind the man who had been scorned just minutes before. David Carter sat tall, his eyes alight not with pride, but with something deeper: responsibility. He opened the leather case at his feet and pulled out a thick stack of documents. Passengers held their breath. Some whispered, "He even prepared files? Was this planned from the start?" David placed the papers on the tray table, his voice warm, yet razor-sharp. In the last quarter, Southwest Airlines received 47 complaints of discrimination. 47. Yet only 3 were formally addressed. The rest? Brushed aside as minor issues. He flipped a page and held it high for Olivia Price's camera to capture. Printed charts and figures were unmistakable. Incidents involving passengers of color made up 8% of all complaints. Olivia nearly screamed into her phone as her live stream surged past 120,000 viewers. "My God, he has evidence! This isn't an accident. This is systemic!" David pressed on, each word striking like a hammer. "Each incident doesn't just wound a passenger, it sends our stock plunging. Just this morning alone, Southwest lost 7.3% in value. That's more than $800 million erased because a flight attendant decided I wasn't worthy of the seat I paid for." Shock rippled through the cabin. A businessman in seat 1C gaped. $800 million in just a few hours? David turned to Hayes and Melissa, his voice like ice. "Do you know how much every word you spoke cost? This is no longer personal. This is economics, reputation, the livelihoods of tens of thousands of innocent employees." Hayes buried his face in his hands, guilt crashing over him. His thoughts turned to his biracial son. If one day that boy was treated the same way David had been, dismissed because of his skin, what would he feel? The thought stabbed like a knife. Melissa sobbed quietly, but David pressed on. He opened another file. Unconscious bias in customer service. Southwest Airlines. Draft training protocol. "Do you see this?" he said, his voice rising. "I have been preparing this training program for 6 months. Today wasn't an accident. This was a test. And you have given me the answer." The cabin erupted. Passengers murmured, some exclaiming, "He deliberately boarded this flight to test the crew." Others nodded in admiration. Brilliant. A living demonstration. On the tablet screen, the executive video call remained live. Patricia Holloway, Senior Vice President of Operations, nodded firmly. "We will implement this training immediately. Today, on Flight 2847, Mr. Carter has proven just how necessary it is." David drew a deep breath, his voice softening with gravity. "I didn't do this to destroy anyone. I did it for Hayes's son, for Melissa's 7-year-old daughter, for the millions of Black, Asian, Latino, Middle Eastern passengers, people who still endure suspicious stares every time they board a plane. Silence swept through the cabin. His words landed in every heart. The passengers no longer saw him solely as a powerful executive, but as a father, as a human being who had endured wounds they themselves had never known. Olivia turned her phone toward herself, tears in her eyes. This isn't just about discrimination. This is a revolution, and we just witnessed it from seat 2A. David glanced at his Patek Philippe, then lifted his gaze, his eyes burning with resolve. From this moment, Southwest will become the first U.S. airline with a zero-tolerance policy against discrimination. Anyone who violates it will be gone immediately. A thunderous wave of applause shook the cabin. Not the polite clapping of ceremony, but the applause of release, of hope. David nodded slightly. In his eyes, there was not only pride, but a fierce determination to turn his humiliation into the power to transform an entire industry. The applause faded, and the cabin sank once more into heavy silence. No longer the panic of before, but a tense anticipation. What would David Carter do next? He closed the folder of documents and tapped lightly on the tray table. The dry, sharp sound was like a judge's gavel striking. Then he lifted his head, his eyes locking on Captain Richard Hayes and flight attendant Melissa Turner. "Now it's your turn," David said slowly, his voice steady, deliberate. "The entire world is watching. You have two choices. 1. Admit your mistakes publicly, here and now. 2. Remain silent and wait for your termination the moment we land." The cabin stirred with whispers. Olivia Price tilted her phone, her camera capturing Hayes and Melissa. The live stream had surged past 140,000 viewers. Comments flooded the screen. "Make them apologize publicly. Don't let them off easy, they must pay for this. Justice in the skies." Hayes drew a shaky breath, sweat breaking across his skin. He had shouted into storms, handled engines on fire. But never had he felt fear like this. The knowledge that his career, his reputation, even his family's future now lay in the hands of the man in seat 2A. Melissa trembled, her fingers gripping the edge of the seat. Tears streaked her face. In her mind, she saw her 7-year-old daughter asking, "Mommy, why are you crying?" The thought wrenched a sob from her throat. David's gaze held them both, his voice dropping lower, sharper than a blade. "I want the truth, not excuses, not procedure. The truth." The cabin went still. Every passenger leaned forward, waiting. Olivia pressed her phone tighter, the chat pouring in. "Say it! Apologize to him now. Stop hiding." At last, Hayes spoke. His voice was rough, unsteady. I was wrong. I trusted Melissa's report without verifying. I acted on prejudice instead of fact. And now I see I betrayed the very values this industry is meant to uphold. Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Olivia shouted into her live stream, "He admitted it!" The viewer count climbed to 150,000. David nodded, but did not move his eyes from Melissa. "And you?" Melissa froze, her lips trembling. Her whole body seemed pinned to the seat. Finally, after a long pause, her voice came, weak but clear. I looked at you and assumed immediately that you didn't belong in first class. I said those words. I was wrong. I'm sorry." David held her in his gaze, letting the silence stretch for several more seconds. Then he turned to Olivia's lens, as if speaking to the entire world. "You have just heard their confessions. This is not merely personal error. This is living proof of how prejudice operates in daily life." The cabin erupted. Passengers muttered, some nodding in agreement, others raising their phones to capture Melissa in tears. The live stream exploded with comments. "This is a lesson for every airline. I can't believe she dared to say you don't belong here. This is history." David crossed his arms, his voice resonant, deep with authority. "An apology is a first step, but apology is not enough. Both of you, from now on, you will become living lessons, traveling to every training center, standing before thousands of employees, recounting what happened today. Not to save your careers, but to make amends for every passenger who has ever been treated the way I was." Hayes bowed his head, as if receiving a sentence. Melissa collapsed onto the tray table, her shoulders heaving with sobs. Olivia drew in a breath, her eyes glistening. She whispered into the live stream, "I've never seen someone wield power like this. This isn't revenge. This is reform." David glanced at his watch. The second hand ticked forward. He raised his head and spoke the final words, low and unyielding. "The show is over. Now is the time for justice to begin." The engines roared as the plane began its descent. Through the window, the lights of Phoenix glittered like thousands of watchful eyes. Outside, television helicopters circled, cameras locked on the Boeing 737, bearing the number Southwest 2847. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was so thick it seemed no one dared to breathe. Every passenger knew that when the wheels touched the runway, they would become witnesses to an event that would shake the entire airline industry. Olivia Price whispered into her camera, her voice trembling with excitement. "Everyone, we're about to land. Dozens of news trucks are waiting below. This will be history." The live stream had surged past 180,000 viewers. Comments flashed wildly across the screen. "I'm watching live from New York. This will be on CNN in minutes. David Carter is a hero." David sat calmly in seat 2A, his hands clasped in front of him. There was no trace of defiance now, only the quiet composure of a man who knew the greater battle was just beginning. On his wrist, the Patek Philippe watch reflected the harsh cabin light, the ticking seconds counting down to a confrontation at the national level. Captain Richard Hayes dabbed sweat from his forehead. Never had a landing felt so heavy. Melissa Turner kept her head bowed, her small shoulders trembling. She knew her little daughter may have already seen everything unfold across social media. The thought cut deeper than any criticism from outside. "Prepare for landing," Hayes's strained voice came from the cockpit. A loud thud reverberated as the wheels struck the runway. Passengers exhaled in relief, but silence quickly returned. Everyone knew this was not the end, but the beginning. As the plane taxied to the gate, passengers craned their necks to see outside. A long row of media vans lined the terminal. Flashbulbs burst through the windows. More than 20 federal agents in jackets, marked federal investigation, stood waiting at the jet bridge. The cabin door opened. Hot desert air from Arizona swept in, along with the roar of reporters, microphones, and an avalanche of questions. Is this the worst case of racial discrimination in airline history? Chairman Carter, will you file a lawsuit? How much will Southwest have to pay in damages? David rose from his seat. His gaze swept the cabin, pausing on Hayes and Melissa. He said nothing, only nodded slightly, a silent reminder. This was just the beginning. 2 federal agents boarded. A gray-haired man stepped forward, flashing his badge. Inspector General Torres, Department of Transportation, from this moment, this is a federal civil rights investigation. The cabin fell into stunned silence. Olivia's camera swung around, her live stream chat exploding. The feds are here. This isn't just about an airline anymore. This is federal law. Torres's voice cut through the cabin. We will need statements from all witnesses. But first, Mr. Carter, do you have any evidence to support this case? David reached into his case and pulled out a thick dossier, the cover stamped clearly. The Hayes, Turner Protocol, Case Study in Institutional Bias. He placed it directly into Torres's hands. I have been preparing for this moment for 6 months. Everything has been documented. And today, you also have hundreds of witnesses and hundreds of thousands watching live. Murmurs spread through the cabin. Passengers whispered, he planned all of this. Torres flipped quickly through a few pages, then looked up, his eyes hard as steel. We will make this flight the precedent case for the entire industry. Thank you, Chairman Carter. David gave a slight nod. He knew the moment closed the first chapter of this battle. But in his heart, he also knew. The real fight had only just begun, and it would change the way the world understood justice in the skies. Olivia ended her live stream, her breath shaky with emotion. I've never seen anything like this. We just witnessed history being written before our eyes. In the back rows, a passenger whispered, after today, no airline will ever dare look down on its passengers again. David stepped down the jet bridge, hundreds of cameras following him. In that moment, he was no longer just the chairman of an airline. He had become a symbol, the man in seat 2A, the man who turned an ordinary flight into a turning point for an entire industry. David Carter's footsteps thundered on the jet bridge floor, each step like the beat of a war drum. Outside, flash bulbs exploded. Hundreds of microphones stretched forward, and reporters shouted over one another. Mr. Carter, are you planning to sue the crew? Was this systemic discrimination? How much will Southwest lose because of this incident? David stopped in the center of the media storm. He lifted his head, his deep eyes sweeping across the sea of cameras. The world seemed to hold its breath. Today is not just the story of one passenger humiliated. This is the story of millions who have been disregarded, forced from the seats they paid for, treated as outsiders simply because of their skin color, their appearance, or their background. His voice rang like steel, each word unbreakable. The crowd stirred. The waves of news coverage carried the broadcast nationwide. On social media, the hashtag #SeatAway exploded, climbing to the top of global trends in minutes. David raised the dossier he had handed to Inspector General Torres. This is the evidence. 47 discrimination complaints in the last quarter. And that is only the tip of the iceberg. From today, Southwest and the entire airline industry must change. A reporter pushed forward. What kind of change, sir? David drew a deep breath. His voice was slow but commanding. I demand 3 things. First, a zero-tolerance policy. Any act of discrimination results in immediate termination. Second, every employee, from flight attendant to captain, must undergo training on unconscious bias. Third, the creation of a $10 million fund to support victims of discrimination. The words struck like thunder. Reporters clamored, microphones shook, keyboards clattered furiously. Torres stepped forward, her voice firm. We will oversee implementation. This will become the civil rights precedent for the American aviation industry. At that moment, Captain Richard Hayes and flight attendant Melissa Turner were escorted out, their faces stricken, microphones instantly turned toward them. Captain Hayes, Ms. Turner, do you have anything to say to the public? Hayes's voice trembled as he faced the cameras. I was wrong. I failed to ask questions, failed to verify, and acted on prejudice. I am sorry. Melissa sobbed openly, her tears blurring her face, her words broken by sobs. I looked at a black man and assumed he did not deserve to sit in first class. That is the greatest mistake of my life. I am sorry. The crowd rippled with shock. Some reporters went silent, while viewers at home grew emotional. Olivia Price's live stream, now past 220,000 viewers, filled with comments. They confessed in front of the entire nation. This is a historic turning point. Do not let their apologies end as just words. David stepped forward, standing beside them. He placed his hand on the microphone, his voice cutting loud and sharp. Apologies only have value when followed by action. I will ensure that these 2 and everyone like them will stand before thousands of employees for years to come, retelling today's events. That is what true accountability looks like. Flashbulbs burst, capturing the 3 of them standing together. 1 man of power, 2 who had failed, as a living portrait of justice and redemption. David lifted his head, ending with a declaration that silenced the world. Seat 2A today was not just a seat on an airplane. It is a symbol of the right to respect, of equality, and of the reminder that no one has the authority to decide where we belong. The roar erupted from hundreds outside, rising with the thrum of helicopters, the crack of flashes, the cries of the crowd. Seat 2A! Seat 2A! David allowed himself a faint smile. He knew this moment would be remembered forever as a turning point in history, not just for Southwest, but for America. The image of David Carter, standing before the rows of microphones, flashbulbs bursting non-stop, spread across the globe within minutes. News networks cut their regular programming to broadcast live. More than 500,000 people were watching on social media. Seat 2A had become a rallying cry, an unexpected symbol. David did not step away from the microphones. His voice carried, steady and unyielding. I'm not just speaking about Southwest. This is no longer the issue of one airline. This is a warning for the entire American aviation industry, and beyond that, for every institution and every system that ever thought it could deny human dignity. He lifted the thick dossier and opened to a page stamped with a bold title, National Aviation Anti-Discrimination Protocol. Over the past 6 months, my legal team and I have built this reform plan, After today, it will no longer remain on paper. It will become real policy, mandatory for every airline to implement. The crowd surged with energy. Reporters pressed closer, questions flying. Is this going to be a federal mandate? Do you have the authority to enforce this across the entire industry? David looked directly into the television cameras, as if speaking to millions watching from home. I will work with the Department of Transportation, the FAA, and civil rights organizations. This will be the new standard. Every airline, large and small, will be required to train employees on unconscious bias, install cameras to record interactions, and create funds to protect passengers. No one will be left in the shadows of prejudice again. Inspector General Torres stepped forward and nodded publicly. We confirm. The Department of Transportation will turn Mr. Carter's plan into a national reform program. Cheers erupted. The passengers of Flight 28427, still gathered just behind the jet bridge, broke into applause. Olivia Price turned her phone back toward herself, her voice breaking with emotion. Everyone, you just witnessed one man transform personal humiliation into an industry-wide reform in just a matter of hours. Behind them, Hayes and Melissa kept their heads bowed, faces pale. They were no longer the center of the story, but living reminders that the bias of two people could shake an entire system. David turned toward them, his voice lower but sharp as a blade. You will not disappear into silence. You will become living proof, traveling to training centers, telling your story of failure. This is not humiliation, but your chance to repair. Hayes nodded, eyes red with tears. Melissa broke down, sobbing, collapsing under the weight of realization, but this time not just from fear, but from finally understanding the value of justice. David returned to the microphones, lifting his wrist to glance at his watch. The second hand slid forward, the light glinting off the glass. He smiled slightly, closing with words that shook the world. Seat 2A will no longer be just a seat number. It will be a symbol, etched into our memory, that justice can appear anywhere, even 30,000 feet in the air. And from today on, every flight, every ticket, every passenger will be treated with the dignity they deserve. The crowd erupted in chants. Reporters raised their microphones higher. Passengers cheered, and the hashtag #seat crossed 1 million mentions. In that moment, David Carter was no longer only the chairman of Southwest Airlines. He had become the face of a revolution, a man who turned pain into legacy, who transformed one flight into a vow that would forever change the entire airline industry. The night sky over Phoenix still blazed with the lights of the media. But for millions watching, the true light came from a single first-class seat. Seat 2A, where one man sat in silence for 12 minutes, allowing the world to see the truth. David Carter did not shout, did not slam his fist, did not seek revenge. He chose silence until prejudice revealed itself. And when he finally rose, he did not just defend himself. He offered millions of others a mirror. Justice is not something handed down from above. It is something we compel others to recognize. Seat 2A became more than a number. It became a symbol of the right to sit in the place you deserve. It became a reminder that the greatest changes often begin with the smallest moments. A ticket doubted, a prejudiced remark, a contemptuous glance. More importantly, Seat 2A showed the power of standing up. Standing up not only to claim a seat, but to claim respect, equality, and a future where no one is told they do not belong. On that day, Southwest Airlines did not just lose hundreds of millions in market value. They lost the safe mask they had hidden behind for years. But at the same time, they were given a rare opportunity, the chance to start over, to build an airline industry that is fairer, kinder, more human. And that opportunity began with one black man in a fine suit, sitting silently in Seat 2A. If you believe that dignity is not negotiable, hit like and subscribe to join us as we continue to tell stories that dare to challenge injustice. And before you go, leave a comment with just one word: respect.